Hello, and welcome to this webinar, which is today's focus is on how to spot if your SAP project is going off track and what steps you can take to correct this. The webinar has been recorded. We will send the slides out at the end. And if you've got any questions, just pop them into the chat. I'm joined by Peter Hobbs today, and he'll collect those questions and we'll have a Q&A and wrap up at the end. So my name's Steve Burnham. I'm a client director at Birchman, and I've been working with SAP customers for over 10 years now. And staying with a sort of navigational theme, I'm about to use a 1914 polar expedition to explain a 2026 software problem. So please bear with me on this one. So in 1914, Ernest Shackleton's ship Endurance became trapped in pack ice in the Weddell Sea. The expedition was over before it had properly begun. For 10 months, the ice held the ship, then it crushed it. Shackleton's options had narrowed to almost nothing. But here's the thing about Shackleton. He did not wait until the situation was obviously catastrophic before changing his plan. The moment the original objective became unachievable, he changed it. He stopped trying to cross the Antarctica and started trying to get his men home alive, and all 27 of them made it. The reason that this story matters is not the drama, it's the decision. Shackleton did not spend months defending his original plan. He assessed the situation, changed his objective, and found a different way forward. That is what good project recovery looks like. It's a pivot. And the earlier the pivot happens, the more options you have. The agenda today follows the same shape as Shackleton's decision. What does a worsening situation in an SAP program actually look like? How do you know if you're in one? What does a credible project recovery look like? And most importantly, what would be the next step for you? The crucial detail in the Shackleton story is easy to miss. The Endurance did not get trapped overnight. The pack ice formed around the ship over weeks, and there was a point at which the crew could still have turned back. They did not recognize the moment until it had passed. SAP programs work the same way. Nobody makes a catastrophic decision on day one. Scope creaks a little bit, a stage gate gets waved through, and the timeline pressure. The SI or the team pushes back responsibility to the client and the client accepts it. The executive sponsor suddenly becomes harder to reach. Each individual moment feels manageable, but by the time the aggregate is visible, the options have narrowed. The figures that you see here on the slide come from independent research, and I'll not read through all of these, I'll just pick one. 1 in 3 cloud ERP public go-lives requires significant go-live remediation. That's not 1 in 10, it's not an outlier, it's 1 in 3. SAP Public Cloud has specific characteristics that make shortcuts during implementation predictably costly at go-live. The platform is designed around standard processes and referential data integrity. When organizations try to replicate legacy complexity inside it, or when data quality issues in source systems are not resolved before go live, the consequences are immediate and visible across the whole business rather than contained within a single module. This is different from an on-premise implementation, where the technical debt can be absorbed quietly over time. In public cloud, it surfaces at go live as cascading failures, integration errors, and incomplete functionality. In each of these projects and go lives, the ice did not form overnight. There was a window. For most of them, it had already narrowed significantly before anyone called for outside help. The point of today is for you to understand where that window is in your program. The 6 obstacles or categories that I've listed here are the ice forming moments, a specific moment when the ice tightened and these ship's options narrowed without anyone quite noticing. And I'm sure many of these will resonate with you all here today. These are the project issues that cause a program to go off track. So let's start with the most common obstacle, into scope and design. Organizations treat cloud ERP as a technical upgrade rather than an opportunity to simplify. Legacy processes, workarounds, and unnecessary customizations get lifted into the new system. The result, as Birchman's own 2026 migration research describes it, is a shiny new system built on the same fragmented, inconsistent foundation. Independent research has also found that fewer than half of organizations in a major SAP study believe that they had used their implementation as a genuine opportunity to standardize. Every customization added during build increases the long-term maintenance burden and reduces the value of the platform. So next we come to data ownership, the handoff that really nobody agreed to. Poor data is the single greatest technical risk in any public ERP cloud migration. Legacy environments contain decades of duplicated, incomplete, or obsolete records. When moved onto an in-memory platform, these issues surface immediately. The more common failure mode, though, is the moment that the development team hands data responsibility back to the customer without adequate support. And the customer accepts it because no one wants to admit that nobody fully understands the source system, and that gap is very difficult to close after go live. Another common obstacle is process definition, always known as the documentation that was never written. So technical and integration document exists in volume on most troubled programs, but what does not exist is the functional rationale behind it. Process workshops during implementation often default to documenting how things work today rather than how they should work in the future and how best to support the business. The system ends up reflecting the old operating model in new technology, workarounds, and all. Our next two obstacles are not technical at all. They really concern culture. So let's start with people and change. Independent researchers identify that this is the single biggest driver of SAP program failures. The disciplines required, operating model design, capability assessment, change impact assessment, global training, adoption measurement, C-level sponsorship, and Centre of Excellence planning are all well documented. In struggling programs, most of these were compressed or skipped under timeline pressure. So when the system goes live, the business has not been brought along, user confidence is low, adoption stalls, and manual workarounds become entrenched. Governance is worth dwelling on because it is the obstacle that allows every other problem to go unaddressed. Scope creeps a little. No one has the authority to stop it. The data ownership gap emerges and no one has a standing to challenge this. Change management gets compressed. No one pushes back on the timeline. Each and individual decision is reasonable at the time. Every program has stage gate reviews on paper. What fewer programs have is someone at those reviews with both the information and the authority to say the stage gate should not be passed. When a CIO is under pressure to hit a board commitment, the team is billing against a fixed timeline, and the program team is exhausted, the path of least resistance is to pass the gate and carry the risk forward. This is how Explore ends without it really being finished. And this is how Realize stage begins on a foundation that's not ready. So, and last we come to the integration design and testing. Integration design is where all the other obstacles become visible as operational problems. It's a point in the system where the consequences of early shortcuts, scopes not simplified, data ownership, processes not defined, governance not enforced, surface simultaneously. The integration architecture was designed with an assumption about the quality and consistency of data coming from the source system. That assumption was not tested properly during design because the data ownership question was never resolved. It was not tested during build because the governance process did not require it, and it was not caught at the stage gate because the risks were downgraded. And so at go live, when the integration runs against live data for the first time at scale, referential integrity failures cascade. This is not a technical failure in isolation. It's a governance failure that became a technical failure. The integration errors are the symptom. The root causes are always upstream. Shackleton's father was actually a doctor. He actually wanted Ernest to go into medicine too. Ernest refused. He joined the Merchant Navy at 16, and that's perhaps fortunate for our purposes today, because the lesson he ended up teaching us is a medical one. The earlier you catch a problem, the more options you have. His father would have called it the diagnostic window. There was a specific moment in the Endurance expedition where Shackleton could see the ship was not going to break free. He didn't wait for the certainty, he acted on the evidence available. On this slide are 5 warning signs that provide evidence for a troubled SAP program. Again, each one is manageable in isolation. 3 or more describe a program whose window is narrowing. So starting with the pre-go-lives, I'm sure everyone's familiar with a RAID log: risks, assumptions, issues, and dependencies. When that log is growing faster and it's being resolved and it's been consistently downgraded, this is one of our first signs. It's a primary mechanism for surfacing and managing problems before they compound. When it's growing faster than it's shrinking, then the program is losing ground. The risks are being downgraded without genuine justification. Team has shifted from managing the program to managing the perception of it. This distinction matters. A steering committee seeing a clean RAID log on a troubled program is being misled, not reassured, and is one of the most reliable pre-go-live indicators that governance has broken down. Next is another project culture sign. Key stakeholders have become engaged, and the program team cannot confirm process ownership. If the business leaders and subject matters who should be validating design decisions have stopped attending workshops or stopped engaging with the program, then the system being built does not reflect how the business actually operates. The cannot confirm process ownership qualifier is the critical part. If the program team cannot name who is accountable for a critical process area, order to cash, period end close, procurement, that process will not work correctly at go live. This sign is almost always present on troubled programs and almost always underweighted until it's too late. There are, of course, other signs that you'll see pre-go live, but because of the time constraints that we have today, let's go on and look at some of the post-go live ones. One of the first ones that we'll see is incomplete functionality, and there's no clear timeline for the resolution. The gap between what went live, what was promised, is visible to the business. What makes this a warning sign rather than a snagging list is the absence of a clear timeline. If the program team cannot say when it will be resolved, it's usually because they do not know how to resolve it. This is a structural problem, not a delivery one. When workarounds are being added faster than the underlying system is being resolved and the RAID log can no longer be actively maintained, then the program has accepted that the system will not be fixed in a structured way. Each workaround adds technical debt and makes eventual remediation more complex. They also tend to be invisible to anyone not close to the operational detail, which is why leadership teams are often the last to understand how extensive these have become. When your implementation partner can't articulate a credible path forward, this is one of the most significant signs of all. When conversation about root cause have become circular, the recovery plan changes week to week, or when the team is defending past decisions rather than solving current problems, the current dynamic will not produce a resolution. This is the point at which an independent view delivers the most value, not because it replaces the SI, but because it creates a basis for a clear decision about what needs to happen next. Sticking with our theme, Shackleton did not wait until the Endurance was fully crushed before changing course. He acted when the evidence was clear, but the options were still open. Pre-go-live signs on this slide are the moments when the ice was forming. The post-go-live signs are when it had already tightened. Either way, the question is the same. How long will the options stay open? Coming back to Shackleton, his pivot was not about starting again. He could not rebuild the endurance. He had to work with what was there, the lifeboats, the men, the ice, the ocean, and find the clearest route from that position to safety. The assessment works the same way. It's not a root and branch rebuild. It's a structured process for establishing exactly where the program is, which parts are recoverable, what needs to change, and what the clearest route forward looks like. 3 weeks, a defined output, and a decision that you can act upon. Now, I know that the instinct at this point is to want someone to come in and start fixing things immediately. We can move quickly, but the programs we see fail twice are almost always the ones where the second attempt started without a clear picture of why the first one failed. 3 weeks of structured assessment is what makes the remediation phase executable rather than optimistic. So the starting point is always the original business objectives, not the current state of the system. The distinction matters because troubled programs tend to become consumed by the immediate problem. The discovery phase steps back to the question that the program was supposed to answer and works from there. The output of this phase is a risk register and prioritized action plan. This is a working document, not a report to file. It's what gives the sequencing of the analysis phase and provides the framework for the recommendations. Clients often find that the discovery week alone surfaces things that have been obscured by internal politics or the program team's desire to project confidence. So after the discovery phase, we move to analysis. So 4 work streams, each producing a specific actionable finding. Integration architecture reviews. The integration architecture review converts the integrations are broken into a rated assessment of every integration point with remediation options. Data integrity converts the data is a mess into a quantified defect catalog and with a remediation effort. And process maturity and organizational readiness convert the business is not using the system into a gap map with named interventions. Stakeholder management converts nobody trusts the program into a clear picture of where confidence needs to be rebuilt and how. Every program that has gone off track has plenty of opinions about what has gone wrong. What it lacks is an agreed, evidenced view. Each phase is designed to replace opinion with clarity. Discovery establishes the current state. Analysis produces document findings. Recommendations delivers a verdict. A plain answer to the continue or re-architect question and a phased roadmap with named Birchman resources. I now want to spend a few minutes on some of the work that we've done, because the most useful thing I can do at this point is to show you what recovery actually looks like in practice, rather than talk about it in the abstract. So you can see now 4 cases on screen. Each of these start with a different situation and a different set of issues. I won't talk through all of these, but highlight just 2. So the first case I want to talk about was in manufacturing, and it speaks to a question I suspect some of you are already asking yourselves. How do I know that the project I'm running can be recovered, or does the whole thing need to be rethought? Our client was migrating from SAP ECC to the public ERP cloud. It's a brownfield migration under a compressed timeline. Critical prerequisites were missed. The system went live as what can only be described as an empty shell. Essential functionality was not there. The business had a new system that could not do what the old one had done. The instinct in this situation, and we've seen it many times, is to assume that if the plan has failed, the deadline has to move. These are actually 2 different problems, and in this case, we kept them separate. We mobilized a senior team quickly, assessed the gaps, completed the missing configurations and data migration activities, re-established governance, and restored delivery confidence. The original go-live and business separation timelines were met, not a revised timeline, the original one. The plan was not recoverable, but the timeline was. These are two different problems and they needed two different answers. The second case is a different kind of situation and included deliberately because the signs of being off track were less obvious. Project was live, broadly functional, but not delivering what it should be. This client operates 7 mine sites across Africa and the Middle East, all running SAP. The system was working, but value realization has plateaued. Finance close times were slow. Supply chain was over-reliant on manual intervention. Nobody would call it a crisis, but the gap between what the system was delivering and what it was capable of was significant. So we ran an end-to-end health check across all 7 sites covering finance, supply chain, maintenance and capital. The output was a prioritized improvement roadmap for each functional area, tiered by impact and ease of implementation, alongside a continuous improvement framework that gave the business the governance structure to sustain the improvements rather than the plateau again. The reason I include this case is to make the point that recovery does not have to start from a crisis. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can do is act before one arrives. So these different situations, post go-live failure, a re-architecture challenge under a hard deadline, and a value plateau, are all in different industries, different scales, different problems. But what they have in common is that in each case, the organization reached a point where it was clear that an independent view and a structured plan were needed rather than more of the same. So I want to finish today by coming back to the original story. When his ship was being crushed by the ice, Shackleton did not call together a committee meeting and a series of stakeholder remediations. He did not wait for the perfect plan. He changed course with the evidence that he had, and while the evidence still left him choices. The reason I keep coming back to this story is the decision point. He acted while the options were open. And that is the moment I want to leave you with today. You can see 4 steps on the screen, and I'll walk you through these briefly. So the first step is simply a conversation. 30 minutes with one of our directors, no obligation to proceed, no commercial proposal, unless both of us agree that there is a fit. I want to be direct about the confidentiality point because I know it matters. If your project is in difficulty, that's not always something that you want widely known, particularly if there's a board or an investor scrutiny involved. That conversation stays between us. It does not have to go anywhere else. But if after that conversation we agree it makes sense to proceed, then we move quickly. We deploy senior named consultants, specific people, and not placeholder profiles, and the focus in those 3 weeks is exactly what it says here on the screen. Stabilize, assess, and restore momentum. You cannot assess a situation that is still actively destabilizing. And you can't restore momentum without a clear view of what you're working with. So the sequencing does matter. Next, we move to the assessment. 3 weeks, no open-ended commitment, and the output is a clear view of what is and is not working. A prioritized roadmap and a commercial outline. I say that plainly because I know what the concern is. The concern is that you bring in an external firm, they find more problems than expected, the scope expands, the cost expands, and it feels like you're in a worse off situation than when you started. This is a legitimate concern and is how a lot of program recovery engagements do go wrong. This is not that. It's 3 weeks. It's a defined deliverable. Nothing expands without your agreement. The commercial outline at the end of the 3 weeks is the gateway to the remediation phase. It is not the start of an unbounded relationship. The last point on screen is the one that I want to end on. An independent view early in the project under pressure tends to reduce cost and preserve more options on one commission later. The options you have today are better than the ones you'll have in a month. That is not pressure. It's just the reality of how these situations develop. So if anything that we've covered today resonates, whether you're in full crisis, whether you're managing a post-go-live situation that's not quite working, or whether you simply know your system should be doing more than it is, the most useful thing that you can do now is have that 30-minute conversation. So thank you for your time today. I'll now ask my colleague Pete to review the questions that we have in the chat, and we'll move to the Q&A.
Sure, thanks, Steve. Let's just have a quick look. We've got a few questions, and actually the first one I think would be a good one to answer is, at what point should we formally call a project off track?
Yeah, so the honest answer is that the clearest sign is usually the one that people find most comfortable to admit. It's not the budget, it's not the timeline, I mean, all of those are visible. It's the moment you realize that no one can give you a straight answer to why something's not working. It's the not we're working on it, but an actual explanation of the root cause and a credible timeline to resolve it. So when that conversation stops being possible, then it's clear something structural has gone wrong. Before go live, the equivalent sign is the RAID log. Risks have been downgraded, as I said before, week on week without genuine justification. Usually means the team has shifted, and I said this before, they're now managing the perception of the program. Some people think, oh well, you just know, but in our experience, the people closest to a troubled program are often the last to call it. That's because they're in a firefighting mode, and sometimes you just don't have the distance to see the pattern. There's also the thing that nobody wants to be that person that raises the alarm. So the signs they're visible in hindsight, and they're usually visible much earlier than anyone really wanted to acknowledge. And that's the whole point of having an independent view. But yeah, great question.
Okay, yeah, and like you say, I suppose that independent review could conclude actually things aren't as bad as you might think, or yeah, whatever.
Absolutely.
So next question I wanted to pick up was, how do you get a project back on track without completely blowing the budget or resetting the timelines? I think you touched on that a bit in your talk, but yeah, could you address that?
Yeah, okay. So the short answer is that you don't start by trying to fix everything. You start by establishing what's broken and what's not. So most programs in difficulty have more of what works than actually the team realizes, but you can't see it clearly because you're too close to the problems. So what the assessment does is it's specifically designed to triage what needs to stop immediately, what needs to change, what should be left alone. The triage is what stops the remediation becoming more expensive than the original program. And this is why the cost of an unstructured recovery is almost always higher than the structured ones, even if the structured one feels a bit slow to start. The programs that blow the budget on recovery are usually the ones that started fixing things before they really understood what was broken, and that's what the 3 weeks is for.
Okay, makes sense. I think we've probably got time for one more question. So yeah, what are the most common root causes you see in problem cloud ERP projects?
Okay, so in our experience, it's always a combination rather than a single isolated problem. But I suppose if I had to name one thing that unlocks all the others, it's always governance. Not because governance is the most technically complex problem, but weak or poor governance is what allows all the other problems to go unaddressed. So I've spoken about, the RAID log getting managed more for perception than reality. stage gates getting passed because no one wants to be the person who stops the clock, scope creep, or sometimes not pushing back on pushing back on scope too hard, and no one really sort of having the authority to sort of say no. Once that governance has gone, then everything else then compounds. So governance is nearly always the biggest issue, and it's the one that's always overlooked.
Yeah, and that's going to be where you're going to get the earlier signs of things, isn't it? It's the sort of the dashboard, if you like. Yeah. Okay, I think that's probably all we've got time for questions. So probably just wrap up.
Okay, well, yeah, thank you for everyone for attending and for submitting the questions. If you have more questions, there is a QR code on the next slide. You can scan that, and you get immediate access to my diary. And from there, you can then set up a 30-minute call, and we can go into that in more details. So many thanks. I hope everyone found that useful, and we'll stop the webinar now.